Rod, thank you so much for being here today. We're super excited to have you on. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, my name is Rod R Garcia. I go with the R in my name, of course, because Garcia is like I think the Smith of the Latin the Latin world. So looking up Rod Garcia does no good. But anyway, I'm a author, a publisher now as well, and a voiceover actor. My background was actually in Hollywood, and I am also a father of two fantastic young adults, and and a husband to an amazing wife who is also my business partner. So yeah,
Love
very
it.
excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. What are your books about?
Well, actually, they've evolved over time. I have about now the book that I've just released is young adult. It is dystopian future, kind of tech gone wrong type of cautionary tech tales. But it's very, if you know Philip K. Dick or Michael Crichton, very much science based, but with the potential for what can happen as a result of relying too much on it, and tie that into a young adult series, which I don't see a lot of. There's a lot of sci-fi, there's a lot of magic, but where the young adult series were concerned, I didn't see a lot of kind of that dystopian tech gone wrong um, theme. So I've tied it together, and it seems to be hitting very well. My previous books, I you had asked what they're about. I actually have about 85 books that I have been working on over time, and they're all at some level of completion. But I'm really, really good at squirreling, and people will ask me, why I never seem to have writer's block, and it's because I always have something to write. It's just not always the same thing. So um, yeah. So my books currently are very young adults based and having a lot of fun with it.
Love it. What are the titles of your current books that you have out?
The current book that I've got out is indGame. It's INDGAME, and it actually alludes to the company. There's a company series where it's from, and it's called Individual Gaming, and so indGame is the nickname for it. Um, I also work on, I have a pen name for some other things that I'm working on as well, but I won't go into that specifically.
Love it. What inspired you to write your book?
Well, I think over time, Endgame itself evolved out of a couple of other stories I was working on. I love anything that is science fact or science probable, if that makes sense. Gene Roddenberry, who wrote the original Star Trek series, he would before he would write an episode, he had a bunch of buddies that were that worked in science departments at colleges and stuff, and he would go to them and say, "So I've got this idea. Is this possible now? Will it ever be possible?" And if they shook their head at him and said, "Nope, never going to be possible based on what we know about physics or the laws of nature or whatever," he would scrap it. He always wanted to stick with things that were potentially real down the line. And I've tried to emulate that. So I stick with things that are based out of science journals and stuff. But a lot of the stuff that I had been writing were they were very singular in their direction, and I suddenly found that they fit together nicely to kind of overlay into a story with a little more danger. So I ended up with this whole concept of video games being um, through nanotechnology being brought into the real world. So it's yeah. So the inspiration really kind of came from other books that I was writing that turned into more.
Love it. When writing your book, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your book is for?
Well, it's initially meant for a young adults audience. Being a dad and kind of my I think of like Eddie Murphy in his career. Like he started out like with a very specific type of comedy. And then as his daughter got to the point where she was understanding what he was doing, he started to tone back and say, I want to do things a little more family friendly. And it's for better or for worse, we got a different Eddie Murphy for a while. So I think as a father, I started really examining what I was writing and wanting it to be something that my kids could enjoy as well. And maybe not for little kids, but at least teenagers and older. And so as long as I kind of kept them in mind and felt like it would entertain them, But I also, if you think about like J.K. Rowling, when I think about how she's written the Potter series, and you think about that first book, it definitely has more of a juvenile tinge to it. Um, but as the books continue forward, the characters grow and the storyline evolves into something that's darker and more dangerous and more mature. And I like that formula, starting off lighthearted and developing a sense of, kind of a sense of security, and then realizing the world is changing as the characters grow. And so my beta readers ranged everywhere from, young teenagers to adults in their 60s and 70s, and it got a very good response and good reception all the way across.
Love that. How long have you been writing?
Writing most of my life, writing seriously. I started working on one of my young adult series back in the early 90s, and finished it back in 98. It just kind of sat. It hasn't done anything. And then it's actually tied into indGame, the indGame series, as the book series has now become a video game series inside the book. So it's kind of meta, which I'll end up releasing that as well at some point. Now the characters will just be familiar, but over the last few years, once I established my publishing company, and it's funny, I once I established the publishing company, I really planned on doing it for other people. I didn't want it to be a vanity press just for me. And after a few years, I decided it was okay to go ahead and move forward to some stuff of my own. So really seriously writing, probably just the last few years.
Love that. What made you really sit down and start to write seriously?
Well, like I say, I had all of these books that were just kind of sitting doing nothing. And my wife and I had recently a couple of really good conversations. When I started EpiphanyMill, or we started it together, I started out as the CEO, and I was really kind of wearing a ton of hats, including wanting to be the creative end of things. And one of the things we talked about was her take a CEO role and me stepping to the CCO role, so I could work with kind of the creative aspects of things, and then open myself up, free myself up to do pursue my own creative goals as well. And it was at that point that she said, "Well, now let's get some of your stuff out there," and asked, what's your stuff that you feel you could put at the front?" Um, and of course, I named off like 10 different things. And she said, "Well, we can only do one at a time. So what is it going to be?" And we settled on Endgame because like I mentioned, the one set of characters that have become a game in it. I've done that with several of my titles that I've kind of been working on over time, and they all get nods, or the characters all have like this little entry point into this novel series, where it has become kind of this nexus point in all of my creative endeavors. And like she said, it seems to be a good solid place to start, because it allows me then to kind of branch out with all of my other characters in a way that they're already recognized.
Yeah.
So
What is
hopefully that was answering it the way you intended.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's very different, but interesting. Very interesting how it like all worked out and came together.
Thank
Um,
you.
what is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
Well, it's very different than it used to be. And I think that's because I've learned to focus on one specific book, as opposed to just kind of taking it as I write when I'm inspired, and I'll write what I'm inspired. And each one just kind of evolves forward. It's almost like watching a race of snails. They're they're all moving forward, but very slowly. But now that I'm focused on one series, it's very different. And where I still work, regular hours as well. I typically will get up at first thing in the morning. It's cold here now. We're in the teens or 20s now in the mornings, so I'm not as apt to get out of bed at 5 a.m. as I might have been. But I'll get up and I'll write for a couple 2 or 3 hours before work. When I'm done, I'll spend another 2 to 5 hours in the evening writing. Sometimes working on book covers. I do my own cover art as well. I've been working in Photoshop for years, so um, but working on some level of that creativity. So yeah, I end up putting in several hours anyway. And I had when I decided to pursue this specific book um, more seriously, I had about a third of it already written. It had been one that I had put a lot of time and effort into already, but I finished the rest of it in about a 30-day period. On average, I was pumping out about 30 pages a day. And so my schedule, once I'm serious about it, I can actually move forward pretty nicely.
That's amazing. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
As little as possible if I want to stay focused. Actually, I have a little studio around me, and it's a separate building, and so it's completely soundproofed. I don't have a lot of distractions from the outside. I'll hear a dog every once in a while that's just louder than what my soundproofing can deal with, but I keep it pretty Spartan in here, and that way I don't have a ton of distractions. But in my writing space, I need the internet to be able to research. Um, and I have a huge whiteboard off to the side where I just kind of jot down character names and traits and little plot points. Google Keep is, oh my gosh, I've started using that since I got back to writing seriously, and all of my notes go in there. So as long as I have access to my thoughts and I can kind of keep things in order, I'm pretty good. I do keep Spotify going with I can't really do a playlist that has lyrics because that can be distracting when I'm writing, but I have a ton of like movie soundtracks and things that I've saved, and I've categorized them into darker tones when I'm writing something dangerous or something that feels a little more on the melancholy side. But so my music and my research, I guess that makes me pretty happy.
Love that. What is your favorite writing snack or drink?
Uh well, coffee would be one of them, and coffee keeps me going. Actually, I always have water with me as well. So my water and my coffee, those are my drinks. I had to think about a snack. I think I'm partial to red vines or Twizzlers. There's just a red licorice, and I just keep a. I haven't had them in here in a little while, but now I'm thinking about it, and I might have to get some. But um, when I'm sitting and they don't really, because and you probably know this, but as you're talking, there are some things you don't want to eat a lot of while you're trying to talk. Sugary things and stuff can be hard on the throat. So yeah, I'm pretty careful.
Love it. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
I Michael Crichton was my absolute favorite author of all time. I love horror as well. I've read at least up until probably the last 5 or 6 years. I read pretty much everything Stephen King had ever written. So um, and a lot of other horror authors, not just King, but between that and then very much kind of the dystopian science fiction, like I mentioned, Philip K. Dick. But I also I love some of the classics. I'll Every once in a while I'll just pick up some Twain or some Edgar Allan Poe or something just to feel, I don't know, just to kind of broaden the the mental faculties. I don't know. It kind of expands things. So different styles of writing, I think, are important to read too. As a writer, it's important to be exposed to different styles of writing.
Love that. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
I would say if there were two, it would be King and Crichton. They were the two that I probably read the most and have probably influenced my style of writing, my style. King, I would say, probably has inspired more my characters and my character creation process. And I've read a lot of the books about on writing, like Stephen King's On Writing, Bird by Bird. There's a ton of them out there. But Crichton very much kind of the story, his building technique, how he kind of builds the tension and even it's interesting. I would say that Rowling has with the Potter series kind of inspired my vision as to how I wanted to present a world and how I wanted to world build. start off soft, and then people realize that things are changing as the characters realize it. So, but I'd say those three probably made the biggest difference. There's a lot of others out there. I mean, Tolkien, Robert R. McCammon. If you've never heard of him, he's a horror author that just for whatever reason, his stuff. He's as good as any of the others, but his stuff he's more like a Dean Koontz. But man, there's just so many authors that I have just enjoyed over the years. But King, Crichton, and Rowling, I think probably were the ones that have inspired me the most in my trajectory moving forward.
What books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
I did. There were a couple, and I started reading really early. I was, and I. It's funny. I as a little kid, I remember a friend of mine. His dad used to have rental units, homes that he would rent out, and every once in a while, someone would leave the place in shambles. And one day we went with him, and we were both too small really to help with the bigger stuff, or because I mean, if something was broken, but we kind of helped clean out the garage. And I came across a box of paperbacks, and he was just going to get rid of them, but he said, if you want them, take them. And there was some amazing sci-fi stuff in there. And in fact, I have them still to this day. And there were some of the original paperbacks from the Star Trek series. There was some, but there were a couple that stood out to me. There was one called Dog's Body by Dana Fuller Ross. And Dana Fuller Ross actually, and I forget what the other book that she's very popular for right now. Um, but she wrote a book called Dog's Body, which is almost you never hear about it. But man, that one, there was something about the the characters' plight, how they had to face the odds and put into a very difficult situation with nothing to work with. There was another one, and I don't. Robert Maddox, actually, I think was the author, and it was called Space Angel. And it's funny, just kind of stuff that really most people haven't heard of, but they they just piqued my imagination. Now, there is one that was an absolute favorite from an early age that a lot of people have heard, and it's called The Phantom Toll Booth by Norton Juster. And if you've never read it, it is an absolute treasure. It's written for younger children, but it's like the old Looney Tunes were. That the humor is definitely geared toward adults. So, and he said he wrote it intentionally so that the adults reading it to their children would not be bored with it, and it's great. And it's funny over the years, kind of going back and reading some of those and finding something new in them. I'll go back and find my original favorites every once in a while and just read through. There was the Terry Terry Brooks, and it was the Shannara series. And it's funny, I read the Tolkien books, but to me, the Shannara series kind of overlapped with them because they were very similar worlds built. And man, yeah, just there were some that are right up there. But I would say probably of all time, Dog's Body was my very favorite. Can't even say why. It probably was one of the first to really just click that switch and go, holy cow, you love reading this stuff.
Love that. On the other side of that, now as an adult, what is your favorite series or authors that if something comes out, you're just gonna automatically grab it?
Um, there are a few. There's a author, and he writes um, apocalyptic stuff, zombies, and he writes some pretty crazy stuff. That his name is Keith C. Blackmore, and I've really enjoyed his stuff. Um, and I just totally blanked. There is a I'll think of his name in a moment, I'm sure. There is a series, it starts off with a book called Ironheart, and it's Brandon Sanderson is the author. And he writes a lot of similar kind of young adult type stuff, but again, geared toward a broad audience from young adult through adults. And it's hero fiction, but it's done in such a different way that it really it's fun to kind of um, it's basically The Boys without the blood and guts and the the hardest edge. And it came out before it too, which was interesting. It actually, I think it kind of paved the way for where The Boys goes with its subject matter. It basically says how we know that power corrupts. How badly can power corrupt? It's pretty cool. But
that.
those, I would say, those are my favorite. If Crichton was still alive, I would be on top of every one of his books that came out. I miss knowing that there's nothing else coming. But yeah,
That. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
just starting out with reading again. Give First of all, I would say give it a chance, because I feel like sometimes people pick things up and then it either feels daunting, it feels like too much. It just give the story a chance. Some of the best books I've read, I've I've gotten a third into the book before it picked up, and I think a lot of times that's and series too. You feel like it's just like, this is moving slowly. It's not what I'm expecting. Um, and then on the flip side of that, if it's not for you, find something else. I think the other thing, you don't want to turn yourself off as a reader because you're trying to read the wrong thing. And I think a lot of times as parents, we're guilty of putting books that we loved, books that we thought were the best thing we ever read, or books we think our kids should read, in front of them, and turning them off to reading because it's just not what they want, and they think that all reading is that way. Um, so find what you enjoy and don't be afraid to read it. I mean, if romance novels are what makes someone want to read, or if it's science fiction, or if it's hero fiction, or young adults or whatever, um, find the genre that sparks your imagination and enjoy it. Don't be ashamed, that people say, what, you only read romance novels? Or I hear that the most, but if that's what sparks the imagination and helps someone actually escape, then wonderful. Reading is, you know, remember, like the old commercial used to say, reading is fundamental.
Love that. On the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting out to write their own book?
Um, that's a big one, because it's first of all, a first draft is a first draft for a reason. Um, People are so afraid to not be perfect, and especially kind of in this whole, we've come into a day and age when it is easier to appear perfect with social media, and so perfection is kind of this kind of almost expected state that we're always trying to attain. Writers are never going to get that the first draft. Um, just remember, it's only to get the thoughts and the words on paper. It's not going to be great in the beginning. And if it is, I mean, you're one of the few. Um, the other thing, and this is something that in fact, it came up with another interviewer recently. We were talking about how um, whether someone needs a publisher or not. If someone is serious and they want to publish, whether self-publishing or finding a publisher is important. And I think most people, when they hear that I have a publishing company, they expect me to automatically say, "Oh, you want a publisher? You need an agent. You need a publisher." Um, my best advice to newer authors, especially if it's going to be a single book or two books, maybe, self-publishing is wonderful, and it's there's so much potential there, and the way the internet has opened up so much to us. As long as you feel like you can handle the marketing aspect of things, and you can go on social media and do all of this. If you're competent enough to write a book, then you should be able to handle the social media aspect of putting it out there. um, I feel like there's a lot of people like maybe you've written a martial arts manual, or you've written a couple of self-help books, or you've written a cookbook or something. Going to a publisher, really, at this point, you may just be giving half of your income away. They may sell twice as much as you, but again, you're paying half of that to a publisher. So, and the other part of that is, I think that nobody will market your baby, your passion, as passionately as you will. If you can take the effort that it took into writing the book, and now parlay that into marketing your book and getting it out there, that's fantastic. Where I say it's a good idea to draw the line is if you are writing more than two books, you're going to write a series, you're writing a few books, and your goal is to continue to write and write and write. That's where an agent and a publisher are probably a good idea. Because now, on the flip side of that, you're going to say, well, I'm putting all this passion into marketing my book, but now you're not finding the time to write. Something's going to suffer, whether it's the writing or the marketing. So there is kind of a fine line as to whether or not it's a good idea, and some of it's just based on volume. So as a newer writer, first, don't give up. Um, Second, just determine whether you want a publisher or an agent or not. And if you do want an agent and a publisher, remember again, I go back to the Rowling story. 50 50 no's before she got a yes. And they always say there's an audience for everything. 50 50 agents said that there was no audience for Harry Potter. One agent believed yes, and the entire world has proven that 51st agent right. So if that's not an argument for absolutely sticking with something you believe in, I don't know what is.
Love that. That's amazing. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
Um, I oop, that wasn't supposed to pop up. So I haven't always been a writer. I haven't always even been a part of the industry, the entertainment industry. Um, a few things. My very first job was as a cattle wrangler, and I spent I got to do hang, herd cattle in Wyoming for a summer, which was fantastic. Got to work for a private investigator for a few years doing undercover work, which was great. And then I worked as an agent in Hollywood for a few years as well, or for several years actually, working through an agency in Hollywood. So I guess when people know what I do now, they don't expect to hear what I did in the past to get here. But it did give me a pretty interesting perspective on the world, and seeing things from two sides.
It's amazing. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
um no, other than being able to, I guess, share where to find my stuff, but I think we we
Yeah.
talk about it, so
So we'll jump right into that. Where's the best place for readers to find your book? I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option? And the best place to connect with you?
yeah. You know what, actually there is something I did want to add now that I think about it, and it kind of ties back to this kind of ties back to what you were saying about writers. There is a distinction between being a great storyteller and being a great writer when it comes to the mechanics of it. Not everyone is. There are some amazing storytellers out there who have difficulty with the mechanics of writing. Don't let that stop you. If you have a story to tell, that's why, and that really ties into that first draft thing. Um, if you have a good story to tell, um, I'm very fortunate. I have a built-in editor. My wife is my editor. She's fantastic, and I'm very, very lucky with that. Um, but I can't downplay the importance of having a good editor and making sure, because the editor will also not just edit for content, but will also edit for clarity and for making sure that there's a good continuity throughout. And also beta readers. Find a group of people that you trust, um, to give you an honest opinion. Mom, big sister, things like that. Maybe if you know they'll be critical and honest with you, it's one thing, but they may not be the best people because they're going to love you and they're going to not want to hurt your feelings. Find beta readers that are willing to read what you've got. Teenagers are probably the best. They will tell you when some things are awful. So yeah, I figured that's kind of important for people to know.
Love that. Love that.
But as far as finding my stuff, Um, it is available through Barnes and Noble. It's fun. I found in-game on the Walmart website now already. Of course, Amazon. The easiest places, though, if my publishing company is called EpiphanyMill. It's the word Epiphany and then Mill, MILL. EpiphanyMill.com. There is a marketplace where everything is found. You can find everything as well, and it's EpiphanyMall.com. Thought I was being clever with that, but it may be having it divided is difficult. But and then of course my website as well. It's RodRGarcia.com. Um, I always put that one last because who knows what a reader is looking for, and if my stuff isn't what they're looking for, we publish detective fiction. We've got other things coming down the pipeline as well that they may be interested in. So on Epiphany Mill or Epiphany Mall. Um, they may find something they weren't expecting to find too.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're
Thank
so
you for
glad we
having me.
could interview you, and we'll be sure to drop the links in the show notes. That way everyone can find it.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't have to spell it. Epiphany, nobody knows how to spell epiphany, I think. Thank you again, Courtney. It has been a pleasure. And yeah, I look forward to chatting with you again in the future.